Very good morning. Welcome to yet another edition of ACFIM Talks. With you in the studio, my name is Felix Kafuma, who is the host, and today we're discussing the national budget 2022-2023. And the bigger question is it responsive to the skyrocketing prices? With me in the studio, I have a gentleman that I'll be introducing. I'm expecting another panelist that I'll be introducing in a short while. But before we start, allow me to, as it is a usual practice, to invite everybody to be part of this discussion. You can subscribe to all our social media platforms. We are live on Facebook, ACFIM. We are live on YouTube, ACFIM Uganda, and also on our Twitter handle at ACFIM-UG. You can be able to catch us and follow these discussions, and also be able to contribute to the discussions. You'll also be able to get the notifications on our YouTube, if you subscribe to our YouTube account, ACFIM Uganda. And yes, again, as we move into the reading of the budget, which is almost a quarter, it's about around a corner away from I think probably next week we shall be having a budget reading. We'll look at the national budget, putting it into the spotlight. And before I introduce the panelists, allow me to lay a bit of a context to why is it important that we have this discussion, especially today and at this point in time. You are all aware that Parliament has approved a 48.1 trillion budget for the financial year 2022-2023. And out of the 48.1 trillion budget, we expect government to generate 25.7 trillion from the revenue collections. That means that we shall be having a shortfall that, as usual, will be raised from domestic and external borrowing. Already, Uganda's public debt currently stands at 73.5 trillion Uganda shillings. So when we are not just about stop being in the books of datas, but when you look at this budget as well closely, which has been approved, you'll be able to realize that the human capital development, which takes care of education, health, and gender, those sectors will take the largest share, standing at 8.7 trillion, which is 18% of the national budget. And then it will be followed by the security and governance program, which is going to take 7 trillion, which is 14% of the national budget, followed by the transport, which will take 4.1 trillion, and then we'll have energy taking 1.6 trillion, and the private sector, which will take 1.5 trillion, and that is pretty much the top 5 beneficiaries from this budget. It's also important for you to know that the 2022-2023 budget is focusing on 3 objectives. The first objective being ensuring peace and stability, and that explains why we have security and governance being the second largest funded budget priority. The third objective is looking at mitigating the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, and I think that also speaks to why there's been significant investment or allocation to the private sector, being among the top 5 that have benefited from the budget allocations. And then the third objective is looking at enhancing socio-economic transformation. So this budget comes at a time when Ugandans are grappling with the skyrocketing prices. Inflation is peaking at 6.3. I think it has risen from 4. I think it was 4.7 somewhere around April, if I'm correct with my figures. and the situation has been blamed on external factors, mainly the war in between Ukraine and Russia, but also the COVID-19 pandemic-induced shortages that have disrupted this global supply chain. This and much more coming up as we discuss today's national budget in focus, whether it is responsive to the skyrocketing prices. And with me, I have already in the studios Moses Mulondo. Moses Mulondo is the president for the Uganda Parliamentary Press Association, UPP, and is ACFIM Talks. I think Moses, you have background in your. My producer, I think, check on Moses to see how we can mitigate the background noise.
No, Felix, are you able to hear me now?
I hear you now. You are clear now. Great, thank you.
Okay.
I'm expecting Honorable Stephen Mukitare, who is the former MP for Bulisa County. We hope he can join in to weigh in this debate. But before he comes in, let me start with Moses. Moses, you've seen the budget. I'm so sure you've had a couple of discussions around this budget that is proposed. The 48.1 trillion budget. What's your take? How do you sum it up? How do you wrap it up in your own perspective?
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, it's a 48.1 trillion. I agree with a number of experts that are saying that our budget is not realistic. Because out of the 48.8 trillion, the projected revenue collection by government is only 25.7 trillion. And that basically means that nearly half of the budget is going to be funded on external and internal borrowing. But also, increasingly, the portion of the national budget that goes to interest and debt payment has been exponentially rising. In the budget for the next financial year, which we are talking about, which financial year starts next month, the budget for interest and debt repayment is 17 trillion. Now, 17 trillion plus our wage bill, which is 6 trillion, that comes to 23 trillion, which is actually our current revenue collection capacity. So it basically means that all the revenue collection that government will get will mainly be spent on debt repayment and paying salaries and allowances. And that means that for all the government activities and programs, for government to be able to fund them, it will have to resort to borrowing externally and internally. But the other major concern about the budget also is that out of the 48.1 trillion, a whooping 34 trillion is for recurrent expenditures. That is money for still paying wages, for administrative costs, for travels inland, travels abroad. Of course, that is money that is majorly consumptive. A whooping 34 trillion. Some time back, I saw a video clip in which the president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, was laughing at us, the neighbors. He was scoffing at us and he said Kenya is not like the neighboring countries that even borrow for their recurrent expenditures. Because if our recurrent expenditure is projected to be 34 trillion, but our revenue collection is 25 trillion, that tells you that certainly we shall have to borrow to cater for some of our recurrent expenditures. And that is not good economically. It does not make economic sense. But also, you have been talking about skyrocketing commodity prices and the state of the economy. Of course, the president recently told us that our economy has reached the lower middle income status. I don't want to disagree with him, only that per capita income measurement is not a reflection of an improvement in the welfare of all the ordinary citizens, because you only get the GDP of the country and divide it by the population and you get the average. So in a country like ours, where we have multinational companies, we have foreign investors dominating the manufacturing sector, Indians and Chinese, and a few rich people who are connected to government, this economic growth actually is concentrated in the hands of those very few people. And it does not necessarily, when it happens, when we get some progress in economic growth, it does not reflect the reality of what is in the pockets of the ordinary citizens. So of course, as a country, we've made some economic progress. We have made a lot of progress, like for when it comes to the exports, the value of our exports has increased from only $253 million in 1992 to now $6.6 billion, which is about 23 trillion annually. But also when it comes to the manufacturing sector, the number of factories has exponentially increased from only 80 factories in 1986 to 4870 factories, actually close to 5,000 factories, which are spread in different parts of the country. Certainly, by such indicators and many other indicators, well, it is agreeable that our economy has made a lot of progress, and I do not disagree with the president when he says we have reached the middle income status. Because middle income status, you reach it by getting, if a country gets a minimum per capita income of $1,036, which is about to, it simply means that every Ugandan is able to earn 3.7 million annually, or when you put it on monthly basis, slightly above 300,000, which is about $100. Even a border rider in our country here, of course, gets that money, more than 300,000 per month. There is a big percentage of Ugandans who are earning that money, more than 300,000 per month. So, but going back to the structure of our budget, the National Planning Authority, which is in charge of crafting our national development plans, and which set targets, like in the NDP3, which is running from 2020 to 2025. There are priorities that they are set which government has to follow in formulating the national budget, some of which have not been followed, especially when it comes to the productive sectors of the economy, which have potential to turn around our economy and improve the economic welfare of Ugandans. These sectors continue to be greatly underfunded. Sectors like agriculture. Actually, the budget for agriculture in the next budget has been reduced from 1.6 trillion to 1.2 trillion. ICT, which has a lot of potential to create millions of jobs. It continues to be greatly underfunded with a budget that is less than 0.5% of the national budget. Industry, the manufacturing sector continues to be greatly underfunded. So this productive tourism continues to be greatly underfunded. Kenya, for example, spends $25 million on marketing their tourism globally. Rwanda spends about $35 million to market their tourism globally. But for us in our national budget, only $2 million are allocated to UTB to market our tourism globally, which is just a drop. So government, and this is also the concern of the National Planning Authority, in their certificate of compliance they have issued on the budget for the next financial year, their major concern is that these key sectors that have potential to turn around the economy have not been allocated enough money. Instead, we see sectors like security are increasingly getting a big portion of the national budget. In the budget for the next financial year, classified expenditure is a whopping 1.9 trillion. The other year it was 3.8 trillion classified expenditure. So every year, a big portion of our national budget is for classified expenditure. And as you know, classified expenditure, you don't ask what it is going to do. And many people think this is actually a conduit for siphoning public resources. So generally, our budget is not realistic in many aspects, but I would like to commend the government for providing money for increasing salaries for scientists. That is highly commendable, but also for Ugandans looking out for opportunities. Government has put in that budget a total of 1.7 trillion as wealth creation funds, about to 1050, slightly above 1 trillion for the parish development model, 100 billions for Emyoga, microfinance support center money for SACCOs, about 80 billions. Actually, Parliament allocated an extra 35 billions in its reallocations for the microfinance support center to give out grants to SACCOs that are beginning. So that means that the money that will be given to those beginning SACCOs, it will not be for paying back. They are just donations, about 35 billions. There is also money that has been given to UDB, close to 100 billions, about 95 billions. And we all know that about a year or 2 years ago, UDB was given about 500 billions as part of government strategies for resuscitating the economy for different businesses to get a low cost credit from UDB. Parliament has also maintained the money for distributing free coffee seedlings, about 35 billions given to UCDA for that purpose. You know, currently coffee is the leading foreign exchange earner for the country, and that is also commendable. So there is a lot of money that government has put in the budget for the next financial year for improving the economic welfare of Ugandans, especially those that are forming groups to do businesses together. Even the Women Enterprise Fund has been maintained in the budget after the intervention of Parliament, about 33 billions there for poor women who can come together and form groups and start income generating activities. Money has been put in the budget. So there is it comes to a total of 1.7 trillion of wealth creation funds that government has put in the budget. That is highly commendable. Also, the budget for the health sector has been increased by 250 billions, but the bulk of it is going to increase salaries for medical workers. Of course, our health sector continues to be greatly underfunded. I saw in the report of Parliament that the Parliament Health Committee that the National Blood Transfusion Service, their budget is only 17 billion. They had asked for more money for collecting enough blood, but it was not given to them, and so we do not have enough blood in the country. Also, the arrangement for National Ambulance Service, the money that was the ministry had requested before was not availed. Even money for rehabilitating a number of district and regional referral hospitals, the money was not availed. So Felix, back to you. That is the preamble I could give you. I am ready to answer any more questions as the discourse goes on.
Wow, it's quite very, very informative preamble. Indeed, you've taken time to look at this budget in detail and break it down. Now let's get to the specifics of this budget. For starters, the projected revenue collection is around 25 trillion. And recently, Bank of Uganda came out and projected a bit of an economic the growth in terms of the economic growth to slow down because of the challenges we are having concerning inflation. So this is the budget that has been that comes at a point in time when our economic performance is not very good, despite the little bit of growth that we are competing against inflation as a result of external global factors. So how realistic is this projected revenue collection in light of the current existing economic challenges to finance this budget that, as is already, is quite ambitious?
Mr. Kafum, actually, in the minority report that was issued by the opposition Shadow Minister for Finance, Mwanga Chivumbi, and Ibrahim Semujunganda, that was one of their concerns. Their argument was that the 25.7 trillion projected revenue collection is not realistic, and their argument was that in the last financial year, government registered a revenue shortfall of 2 trillion. And in the previous financial year of 2019-2020, the revenue shortfall was 3 trillion. In the current financial year, which is ending, last week, the Minister for Finance told us in an engagement we had with him that they have so far registered the revenue shortfall of close to 800 billion. Of course, that tells you that at least because we have just a few weeks to the end of the financial year, but that was as of April. That was as of April 2022. But of course, the financial year is ending. But his argument was that at least the shortfall has greatly reduced from 3 trillion to 2 trillion and now to 800 billions. Even if the financial year ends for the remaining few weeks, the shortfall will still be lower. His argument was that they are optimistic that the revenue collections will grow. I want to agree with him to some extent because right now the economy, of course it was in January, the government fully reopened the economy. And because the economy was fully reopened, so all the segments of the economy are now active, and that has led, even from the reports of Bank of Uganda, they have been indicating, the monthly reports, that there is a huge increase in the economic activities since the economy was fully reopened. And because of that, there is a high likelihood that the 25.7 trillion revenue collection can be achieved because the economy is now fully reopened. But also, in as much as they are skyrocketing commodity prices globally, Uganda has not been greatly affected like so many other countries, and that's why even our inflation is not as high as is the case for so many other countries, including countries in the region. And the major reason for that is because for us, we have a lot of food as a country, because food is a major contributory factor to our country's inflation. So for us, we continue to have plenty of food, and that is why in the region in East Africa we always have one of the lowest inflation rates, because for us we have a lot of food, and that is partly one of the reasons why also we have one of the lowest cost of living in the world. The cost of living is so low in Uganda. So I am very optimistic that that revenue collection target can be achieved. Government only needs to ensure that more resources are put in the productive sectors of the economy, because when more resources are put in the productive sectors of the economy, more incomes will be generated which government can tax, and that will raise revenue collections. But of course, government has not been strategic when it comes to revenue collection. Our tax to GDP ratio of 13% is one of the lowest in the world, even in Africa. Africa's average is 16.9%. So our government has not been strategic. Even the World Bank says Uganda has potential to have a tax to GDP ratio of 23%. We are only at 13%. One of the reasons actually I have had experts put across why our tax to GDP ratio is still very low is because of tax exemptions. Of course, some of these tax exemptions arise out of connivance between some government officials and some of these investors, big investors. A big number of them are exempted from paying taxes. I saw a report that indicates that the country loses about 80 trillion because of these tax exemptions. So in that area, government has not been strategic enough to be able to ensure that our tax to GDP ratio goes up. And that is why, by the way, you talked about our public debt reaching 73%, and our debt to GDP ratio is now over 50%, which many experts say when it goes beyond that, it means it is no longer sustainable. And when you talk about that, some of the officials from the Ministry of Finance will tell you there are other countries that have a debt to GDP ratio of 80%, even beyond. Yeah, and sometimes they even point out some of the developed countries. But what they forget is that many of those developed countries have a very high tax to GDP ratio, which means they have the capacity to pay back. But for us, we have a very low tax to GDP ratio. It means the government's capacity to generate enough revenue to pay back the debts is very low. And that means actually that is why government has to limit its appetite for borrowing, because our capability, our capacity to pay back is very, very, very limited. Thank you.
Okay, you're still watching ACFIM Talks, and I'm with Moses Mulondo, who is the president of UPPA. UPPA is Uganda Parliamentary Press Association, and we are trying to analyze this budget that was passed.
And Kafuma, yes. You forgot to indicate that apart from being a journalist, okay, I am an expert in these matters. I have a Master of Business Administration. So wow, I am talking about these matters as an expert.
Okay, expert. I will call you budget expert. Indeed. My apologies for that. Yes, but let us go for a break. But when we come back from a break, I think we need to look at now the issues around this. Of course, you partly touched it. Issues concerning the way we plan to finance this budget, but also the bigger question that anybody is trying to understand: why are we failing as a government, as a country, to cut our cloth according to the size we have? Why do we budget for 40 trillion when we can only collect just 25 trillion, and also looking at the figures of how much we lose in terms of corruption, how much we are able to raise in terms of tax revenue, is there a problem with planning? I think we shall